It was late, but Diana couldn't determine the exact time. She hoped the persistent ringing was coming from Marty's phone, not hers. Annoyed, she buried her face in the pillow and muttered a grateful thank you when it finally stopped after the fifth ring. Just as she was settling back into comfort, the ringing resumed. "Damn it," she exclaimed, opening her eyes. "Martin, answer your phone." Her words trailed off abruptly as she realized her husband wasn't beside her. Glancing at the clock, 3:37 a.m., she grabbed her phone from the nightstand, wondering why Marty wasn't in bed. He had been there when they went to sleep a few hours earlier. "Hello," she answered groggily. "Is this Diana Miller?" the voice on the other end inquired. "Yes, it's me." "Who's calling?" "Are you the wife of Martin Miller?" "Yes, for heaven's sake, yes." "Who is this?" "Mrs. Miller, this is the emergency room at Northtown Medical Center. Your husband was brought in about an hour ago. We still had your contact information from the incident a year ago. He's been in an accident. Can you come down right away?" "Oh my God. Is he okay?" "I'm unable to discuss his condition over the phone, ma'am. Can you please come down?" "Yes, of course. I'll be there as soon as possible." Diana hurried upstairs to wake her daughter, Dallas. She shook her gently at first, then with more urgency. "Dal, wake up." No response. "Dally, wake up." This time she nudged her daughter's shoulder, but still, there was no reaction. "Dallas, wake up." Startled, Dallas sat up in bed, trying to focus her hazy eyes in the suddenly bright room. "Dallas, your father has been in an accident. He's in the emergency room. Get dressed, we need to go." Without hesitation, Dallas got out of bed and peeled off her nightshirt, not considering her nakedness in front of her mother at the age of 20. She quickly grabbed some clothes, while Diana was preoccupied with finding an outfit for her. Once they were both dressed, Diana and Dallas drove to the hospital as swiftly as they deemed safe. Dallas bombarded her mother with questions along the way, but Diana had no more information to offer than what she had already shared. Despite feeling like an eternity, the journey only took about 10 minutes due to the lack of traffic at that time of night/morning. Finding a parking spot near the entrance, Diana parked the car hastily, disregarding the poor angle. They hurried inside and were directed to Martin's room in the ER, where they were taken aback by his condition. Martin was heavily bandaged and clearly unconscious. Given forms to fill out, Diana and Dallas began the paperwork. Even in the midst of grief, bureaucracy persisted. Dallas moved her chair closer to her father's bedside. They had been there for about an hour when two police officers, a man and a woman, entered the room. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Gail Stanton, and this is my partner, Robert Hansen. We were the first responders at your husband's accident. Any updates on his condition?" Officer Stanton inquired. "No one has informed us yet," Diana replied. "Oh, and this is my daughter, Dallas. We need to ask you a few questions. I know it's a difficult time, but it's best to do it now," Officer Stanton continued. "Of course," Diana agreed. "Do you know why your husband was out at this time of night?" Officer Stanton asked. "It's strange, really. He was at home, and we went to bed together around 10 p.m. I didn't realize he wasn't there until the hospital called," Diana explained. "Ma'am," Officer Stanton turned to Dallas. "Can you confirm this?" "Yes, I can. We were watching a movie on TV that ended at 10, and then we all went to bed. I saw Dad go into the bedroom with Mom," Dallas confirmed. "What movie were you watching?" Officer Hansen inquired. "It was something with Keanu Reeves, an action movie. Dad chose it, it was his turn," Dallas replied. "Were there any specific issues or problems you were facing as a family? Financial troubles, perhaps? Or marital issues?" Officer Stanton asked. "Nothing out of the ordinary for married couples. No specific problems. I just can't understand why he was out without me knowing. Are the people in the other vehicle okay?" Diana responded. "Well, here's the thing, Mrs. Miller. This was a single-car accident. According to witnesses, your husband's vehicle was driving normally and then suddenly accelerated directly into a large oak tree at the corner of highways 121 and 288. There were no skid marks, and no one recalls seeing brake lights, Officer Stanton explained. Diana and Dallas exchanged concerned glances as the officer's implications sank in. Are you suggesting that my husband did this intentionally? That he tried to harm himself? Diana asked, her voice trembling. We'll need to examine the vehicle for any mechanical issues, and of course, we'll speak with your husband when he wakes up. But yes, that's one possibility we're considering. Are you absolutely certain there were no problems you can recall? Officer Stanton pressed. Officers, I love my husband dearly, and our marriage is wonderful. There are no issues that I can think of. I believe this was just a case of him losing control or perhaps dozing off. It was very late. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Diana's voice trailed off as she burst into tears, unable to finish her sentence. Officer Stanton placed one of her cards on the table, urging them to call if they remembered anything else before they left the hospital. Dallas closed the door to Martin's room for privacy. You didn't tell them, Dallas observed. No, Dallas, I didn't, Diana replied, her tears subsiding. It's not their concern, and it's irrelevant to this situation. Your father was okay with it. If it mattered, he'll mention it when they speak with him. We'll address it if it comes up. The following days dragged on slowly for everyone. Martin remained unconscious and was hospitalized, while Diana and Dallas spent as much time as possible with him. They made sure he was never left alone. Fortunately, Diana contacted Martin's employer and informed him of the situation, careful not to imply anything that could suggest Martin's involvement in the accident. The accident occurred late Saturday night or early Sunday morning, and Martin began showing signs of waking up on Wednesday morning. By that afternoon, his eyes were open, though he was still limited in movement due to the medical equipment. Diana reassured him at his bedside, but their interaction was interrupted when a nurse hurried into the room, alerted by the monitors indicating Martin was awake. Diana stepped back to allow the nurse to attend to him. More medical staff entered the room to assess Martin's condition. Diana stepped outside to call Dallas and inform her that her father had awakened. However, Dallas did not pick up, so Diana left a voicemail. As the medical equipment was removed, it became evident that Martin's left arm was broken, but it was not expected to impede him significantly. His throat was sore from the tube, so he was provided with a whiteboard for communication. Martin communicated his wish to the nurse, who left to inform the others. Mrs. Miller, I regret to inform you that your husband has requested that you and your daughter not be allowed in his room, the nurse relayed. What? He's my husband. I have every right to be with him, Diana protested. I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller, but the patient's wishes take precedence. Let me speak to him. We can resolve this, Diana insisted. Diana attempted to approach Martin's room but was stopped by the nurse, prompting her to raise her voice in frustration. Martin, please talk to me. What's happening? Martin. Mrs. Miller, please refrain from shouting. You're disturbing other patients. You can wait outside if you'd like, but if there are any further disruptions, we'll have to ask you to leave the premises. Is that clear? The nurse warned. Yes, crystal clear, Diana responded, realizing she had no other choice. Dallas arrived at the hospital 45 minutes later to find her mother sitting outside her father's room. Mom, why are you out here? Your father has barred us from the room. Both of us? I get why he'd exclude you, but why me? What do you mean? And why did it take you so long to get here? I had just woken up when Bradley stopped by to check on me. We kind of... Geez. You were with your boyfriend instead of being here for your father? Sorry, Mom, but he was still unconscious when I left, Dallas responded, her tone indicating otherwise. This situation has been really stressful, and I needed to unwind. It was effective. When you have a moment, you should call. No, Dallas. I won't do that. And let's not discuss it now. It's disrespectful. The irony of the situation made Dallas chuckle. There was a knock on the door, and a tall, attractive brunette entered. She was dressed professionally, but not like a doctor, though her badge identified her as a staff member. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. I'm Dr. Lassiter, one of the hospital's mental health specialists. How are you feeling?" "As well as can be expected, I suppose." 9 days had passed since the accident. Martin had regained his ability to speak, rendering the whiteboard obsolete. He had inquired about his release, but never received a clear answer until now. "The hospital has requested that I spend some time speaking with you. Is that acceptable?" "Do I have a choice?" "Not if you want to be discharged soon." "I need to assess your readiness to leave," Dr. Lassiter replied with a wry smile. "Then let's proceed." Dr. Lassiter pulled a chair next to the bed and sat down, crossing her legs. She took a few moments to review the file she carried. "Okay, you were admitted over a week ago following an accident involving you and a tree. I also see that you've prohibited your wife and daughter from visiting, and I suspect there's a connection." "You hit the nail on the head," Martin acknowledged. "She was having an affair." Unfortunately, not an uncommon occurrence these days, though it seldom results in such extreme reactions. "Is there more to the story?" Martin fell silent for several minutes. He wasn't eager to discuss this, especially with an attractive female doctor. He wondered if there was an older male doctor he could talk to instead. Dr. Lassiter patiently waited, accustomed to waiting for patients to open up. Eventually, Martin began to speak. "I was experiencing depression, I suppose. It wasn't officially diagnosed or anything. I just felt, well, like I said, depressed." "Was there anything specific causing it, or just a general feeling?" I haven't been able to achieve an erection for over a year." "Since the previous accident, correct?" She already knew. She likely had his entire medical history. She was just prompting him to say it. "Yes. It wasn't a severe accident. I was in the back seat, my boss was in the front passenger seat, and his boss was driving. We were rear-ended. There were no airbags or much damage, but I wasn't prepared for it. I experienced whiplash and hit my head on the seat in front of me. I think that's what caused it." "The report states you had a mild concussion and whiplash," the doctor interjected. "My doctors couldn't explain it. None of the ED medications had any effect. They conducted numerous tests, some multiple times, and the best explanation I received was that something happened, causing damage to part of my brain." "So, the inability to achieve an erection led to your wife eventually becoming dissatisfied with your sex life, which led her to have an affair. This ultimately wore you down and culminated in the events of that evening. Is that accurate?" "In essence, yes." "How long passed before your wife took that step?" "About 7 or 8 months, I suppose. We tried oral stimulation and bought toys to compensate." "For penetration." "I understand, Mr. Miller. I'm familiar with the concept," Dr. Lassiter reassured him. "Of course, sorry. I'm just a bit uncomfortable. Anyway, initially, we managed, but we were hoping my condition would improve. We talked about spending entire weekends in bed, having a good time. Unfortunately, that never happened. Eventually, it went on for so long that she sought satisfaction elsewhere." "Did she discuss this with you beforehand?" "No. I discovered it when I returned home early from work. A typical cliché, I know. Not only was she with her lover, but my daughter and her boyfriend were also." "Engaging in sexual activity?" Dr. Lassiter's surprise was evident. "No, thank goodness. Diana and Bill were in the bedroom, and Dallas and Brad were in the living room. That's how I learned of my wife's infidelity and my daughter's knowledge and apparent approval." "Which explains why your daughter was also excluded." "Yes. Oh, and in case I didn't mention it earlier, Bill is Brad's father. We knew him casually as our daughter's boyfriend's father. I later discovered that Dallas had suggested Bill to her mother. That's another blow." "Did you confront them?" "Not at that moment. Perhaps if Dallas hadn't been there, I would have confronted Diana, but I had already seen more than enough of my daughter's intimate life. I left and waited until later that night. How did that conversation go? Not as I anticipated. She regretted that I found out, but made it clear that if I couldn't satisfy her, she would seek satisfaction elsewhere and preferred a regular partner, as she phrased it, to finding someone new each time. Bill was unattached and had similar needs, so he became her choice. What action did you take? What could I do? She was correct about my inability to perform. It wasn't her fault that I couldn't satisfy her, so she did what she felt she had to. What if, hypothetically, she had discussed it with you beforehand? Would you have agreed? I've thought about that a lot, and part of me wanted to say I would have agreed because I loved her and wanted her to be happy. But deep down, I don't think I would have been okay with it. We made vows, promises, including in sickness and in health. I couldn't have done it to her, so I couldn't have been okay with her doing it to me. She continued seeing him after you found out. Yes, she did. And once I knew about it, she was less discreet. I don't know if they started seeing each other more often, since I don't know how often it was happening before. But previously, it was limited to daytime encounters while I was at work. Now, there were weekend trips to the store, and it was obvious that some of that time was spent with Bill. That must have been incredibly challenging. It was beyond challenging. But I felt powerless. She deserved a fulfilling sex life, and I couldn't provide it. Yet, the entire situation was tearing me apart. Can you tell me about the night of the accident? We watched a movie together as a family, like we used to. Despite my emotional pain, I kept it to myself. Maybe that was a mistake, but I didn't want to burden Diana or Dallas. After they kissed goodnight, I waited for Diana to fall asleep, then I got dressed and left. I checked on Dallas, blew her a kiss, and said goodbye. I got into my car. I knew it had airbags, but I thought if I hit hard enough, it wouldn't matter. I didn't have a specific plan, just drove around. I was aware of the oak tree, but it wasn't my initial destination. I drove past it once, then realized there were no barriers and a clear approach. I circled back and drove straight for it. They sat in silence, allowing the weight of Martin's words to settle. Eventually, the doctor spoke. Mr. Miller, I appreciate your openness and honesty today. It's not common. I'll leave you to rest and process. Would it be all right if I return tomorrow? I'm not going anywhere, he replied. They shook hands, and Dr. Lassiter left the room. Martin checked his phone, catching up on messages before closing his eyes, attempting to sleep. Back at home, Diana struggled to maintain her composure. She had believed that Marty was accepting of her relationship with Bill, thinking he saw it as a gesture of love. Initially, she dismissed any connection between the accident, which she no longer believed was accidental, and her affair, but doubts crept in. She worried that the police might have questioned Marty about her affair with Bill. While they hadn't contacted her again, she speculated that they might have concluded it wasn't a crime and labeled the incident as a suicide attempt. But had Marty ever objected? She couldn't recall. Regardless, she refused to give up her sexual fulfillment due to someone else's recklessness. She resolved to be more attentive to Marty's feelings and discreet about her rendezvous with Bill, but she wasn't ready to end it. The following morning, Dr. Lassiter returned as promised. She grabbed a chair and sat down, engaging in light banter with Marty. Marty couldn't help but admire the doctor's figure, though his libido remained dormant. How are you feeling today, Mr. Miller? Not much different from yesterday, Doc. Ready to go home, but I guess that's up to you. Partially, but there's a 72-hour hold on you as per state law, which technically started with our conversation yesterday. So, at least 2 more days here. That's okay, Doc. At least the food isn't too terrible. It's all bad, they joked in unison, sharing a laugh. An oldie but a goodie, Dr. Lassiter remarked. But it's good to see you making jokes. Me too. It's been a while, months really, since I felt like myself. I used to be quite the jokester, even annoying Dallas sometimes. Have you had any negative thoughts, delved into dark places in your mind recently? You know, Doc, I haven't. I spent a year feeling fairly depressed, then the last few months really down. But now, it's replaced by anger, frustration, disappointment. Mainly with Diana and Dallas, more so with Diana, but also with myself for not standing up for myself, for not making it clear to my wife that her actions were unacceptable. Are you planning to assert yourself now? Absolutely. While part of me is tempted to just file for divorce, I realize I have to take responsibility for letting Diana walk all over me. If she's willing to end things with Bill, I'm open to counseling and rebuilding our marriage. I admire your determination, Mr. Miller. This kind of turnaround is rare to see so quickly. I had a lot of time to reflect while lying here, even before you arrived. I appreciate the opportunity to voice my thoughts, to share them with someone. It helped me focus. Excellent, Mr. Miller. In that case, I'll keep it brief today. I have a few more patients than yesterday. I'll stop by tomorrow for a final chat, but I see no reason you won't be able to leave on schedule. I look forward to it, Doc. Diana and Dallas arrived at the hospital to pick up Marty upon his release. Marty understood that if he wanted to rebuild their relationship, he needed to start by acting as if reconciliation were possible. There was still healing to be done. The airbags had proven remarkably effective, exceeding Marty's expectations. However, he suffered a concussion that required ample rest in a dark room. The television remained off, replaced by soft background music, while his wife and daughter attended to his needs. All seemed well for a little over a week until Diana mentioned needing to go shopping. No, Marty calmly interjected. What? Diana responded, perplexed. Marty, we need groceries, and you also need some of your therapy creams. Write a list for Dallas. She can go, Marty suggested. Why are you bringing me into this, Dad? Besides, I have plans with Bradley, Dallas chimed in. Then you'll have an extra incentive to finish the shopping quickly. Diana, make a list, Marty insisted. This is absurd, Martin. You can't just come home and disrupt our routine. Dallas has plans, and I'm going to the store, end of story, Diana retorted. Do you think I'm oblivious, Diana? Marty questioned. Oblivious? No, Marty, of course not. Why would you even suggest that? Diana responded. Do you think I don't realize these shopping trips are excuses to see Bill? Marty pressed on. I have never failed to return with groceries, Marty. Not once. Diana defended. Yes, but it's become a convenient cover. You're gone too long, and I can see it in your demeanor, your appearance, even your makeup. Part of that time is spent with Bill, and that stops now, Marty asserted. The shock in Diana's eyes was evident, and Dallas felt a newfound respect for her father. Marty, please, we've discussed this before. I'll make an effort to be more discreet. But I refuse to end things with Bill. I have a right to a sex life, Diana argued. So, our vows mean nothing to you? Forsaking all others? In sickness and in health? This is the sickness part, and you're not forsaking others. Either you stop seeing Bill, and we seek counseling to repair our marriage, or we end it, Marty declared. You can't threaten me, Marty. I didn't cause the accident. I'm not going to accept losing my sex life for something I had no part in. I'm going shopping, and I'm seeing Bill. If you want to discuss this further tonight, we can, but don't think you can dictate my actions. Diana exclaimed before storming out, leaving behind a palpable silence. Father and daughter exchanged glances before Marty retreated to his bedroom. As dusk settled outside, Dallas returned home to find her father in his bedroom. She noticed a faint glow emanating from the bathroom, where the light was on and the door slightly ajar. Understanding that her father preferred some light but none of the room's fixtures provided such a low setting, she approached him. Dad. He remained with his back to her but responded, Dallas. I'm sorry. Her apology caught his attention, prompting him to sit up in bed and face her, discovering his daughter tearfully standing in the doorway. Sorry for what? He inquired, his tone cautious after their recent strained interactions. Dallas moved closer, positioning herself at the foot of the bed. I'm sorry for what I did. I I was just trying to help Mom, you know? She was so upset about what you were going through, and that you couldn't. Their eyes briefly met, conveying a shared understanding of the unspoken difficulties. Well, you know what you couldn't, he acknowledged, his tone tinged with sorrow. And Bradley's dad had been experiencing the same thing since Mrs. Coyle passed away. Bradley mentioned his dad always talks about missing her, especially the intimacy. I thought they could, you know, support each other. I'm sorry I never considered how it might affect you. Is that why you did what you did that night? Marty was taken aback by his daughter's unexpected confession. While he remained cautious, he recognized the sincerity in her words. Mostly, I think, he admitted. I was pretty depressed anyway, just because I couldn't, well, you know. Father and daughter exchanged a brief smile, acknowledging the shared understanding of their struggles. But that's over now, Dally, Marty reassured her. I'm not going to do that again. I hope not. I still need you, Dallas expressed her concern. Are you going to divorce Mom? Marty paused before responding. I haven't made any final decisions, sweetheart, but I don't see any other outcome if she won't stop seeing Bill. But let's keep that between us. She needs to change because she wants to, not because she has to. Okay, Dad. I'm going to head upstairs. Oh, I broke up with Bradley tonight. Marty couldn't help but hide a smile. Why, he asked, curious about her sudden decision. Because, Dallas began, pausing to collect her thoughts. Because my daddy once told me you wasn't good enough for me. And I finally realized he was right. I finally realized my daddy was right about a lot of things. A smile crept onto Marty's lips as he observed his daughter's newfound maturity. Dallas approached him and embraced him, realizing it was their first hug in a long time. After they pulled away, they exchanged smiles, and Marty silently watched Dallas leave the room and head upstairs. As soon as Marty heard his daughter's bedroom door close, the sound of Diana remotely locking her car shattered the brief moment of joy he had experienced. He reclined back and shut his eyes. Moments later, Diana entered the bedroom. She had showered at Bill's place, a choice Marty guessed was preferable to returning smelling of sex, although their shared knowledge of her activities would have been apparent either way. Can you help with the groceries, please? Diana asked. There are groceries? Marty joked as he sat up. Yes, Marty. I told you I was going grocery shopping, and I did, Diana replied. Marty fetched the bags from the car and emptied them onto the counter. He noticed they contained only non-perishable items, all intended for stocking the pantry. Glancing at the receipt, he saw that Diana had checked out of the store nearly 2 hours ago. It seemed she had gone shopping before visiting Bill, as expected. Despite knowing it was inevitable, seeing the evidence before him still stung. Once the items were put away, Marty headed back to the bedroom without saying another word, contemplating whether it was worth bringing up the topic again. He concluded there was no point. Diana had made her intentions clear, so the next step was figuring out his response. Change was necessary. Did you want to talk some more? Diana inquired, her tone indicating skepticism about its usefulness. No, Diana. You made your position clear, Marty replied. Diana's demeanor softened. She loved Marty deeply and didn't want to lose him. He was still her closest companion and the person she enjoyed spending time with the most. She genuinely believed that seeking sexual satisfaction, given the circumstances, shouldn't be an issue. She hoped Marty would eventually come to the same conclusion. Are you hungry? She asked, attempting to shift the focus. No. I made some fettuccine while you were out, Marty responded. Did you have a salad? You haven't been eating enough vegetables lately, Diana reminded him. No salad, but I made some spinach, Marty assured her. Diana nodded in approval before proceeding to get dressed in her closet. She considered rekindling intimacy with Marty, something sorely lacking in their relationship, but decided against it for the night. By the time she finished changing for bed, Marty appeared to be asleep or at least pretending to be. The divorce proceedings turned contentious. Diana erupted in anger when served with the divorce papers. Marty had arranged for them to be delivered to the house while he was out with Dallas, having moved into the guest room upstairs next to their daughter's room. Diana fiercely opposed the divorce, enlisting a combative attorney who employed every legal tactic available. They even attempted to have Marty declared mentally unfit, citing the alleged suicide attempt. Anticipating that Diana might attempt to challenge his mental state, Marty decided to seek counseling the same week the divorce papers were served. He opted for a well-respected psychologist, albeit not an inexpensive one, whose testimony convinced the judge that Marty was no longer a suicide risk, resolving the issue. Just when it seemed like the divorce battle would drag on, Dallas intervened. She reminded her mother that their actions had been wrong, emphasizing that Diana's desires couldn't outweigh the vows she had taken. Dallas warned that further resistance would strain their mother-daughter relationship irreparably. Faced with the prospect of losing both her husband and daughter, Diana reluctantly dropped her objection to the divorce. The house was sold, and Marty agreed to provide alimony for a couple of years, acknowledging that it would likely be mandated by a judge anyway. Diana moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near her workplace and eventually secured full-time employment 8 months after the divorce was finalized. However, she harbored bitterness and resentment, especially when Bill ended their relationship, revealing he was involved with other women. Without the status of marriage, Diana lost her appeal to him. Let's take a little break. If you like stories like this, then subscribe to my channel. Continuing the story. Dallas continued her studies as a commuter student, dividing her time between both parents' homes. Over time, she grew frustrated with Diana's victim mentality and her tendency to blame Marty for the divorce. If she heard her mother say, "If only he had been more understanding," one more time, Dallas felt she would scream. As for Marty, around 10 p.m. on a Friday night, Marty walked into a dimly lit club, seeking a temporary escape from his troubles. He hoped to unwind with a few drinks and dances, attempting to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Sitting at the bar, he ordered a rum and cola, observing the other patrons. At the far end, he spotted a familiar face, though it took him a moment to place it. She had long, dark brown hair and wore a revealing dress. After some contemplation, Marty approached the woman. She met his gaze as he reached her. "Dr. Lassiter?" She studied his face for a moment before responding, "I leave Dr. Lassiter at the hospital. Out here, I'm Vicky. But I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage." Realizing he had the right person, Marty introduced himself. "It's been a while, and I'm sure you talk to a lot more patients than I do, beautiful psychologists," he remarked. "I'm much better with names than faces." "Try me," she replied. "Martin Miller." Vicky pondered Martin's name for a moment, and he patiently waited for a response. He observed her closely, and later he would swear he saw a light bulb go off in her mind. "Ah, Mr. Miller. An unfaithful wife and a rather sudden collision with a tree, if I'm not mistaken," Vicky remarked. "You're correct, and I'm impressed. We only spoke twice over a year ago, almost 2 years ago," Martin replied. "It's a gift. Care to join me?" Vicky invited. Martin took a seat and signaled to the bartender to refill their drinks. "Thank you," he said appreciatively. "It's my pleasure. So, what brings you out tonight? Meeting someone?" Vicky asked, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Trying to," Martin replied, catching her meaning. "Really? I thought I recalled a rather impressive rock on your finger back then," Vicky teased. "You may have. That's a little before my divorce was final. I was wearing my rings while trying to convince my husband, ex-husband, that he really didn't have anything in common with a 20-year-old cashier except a willingness to have one of her friends join them in bed. I'm afraid I wasn't successful," Vicky explained. "Oh my. Are they still together?" Martin inquired. "This may come as some surprise to you, Mr. Miller, but after my divorce was finalized, I completely lost interest in Wayne's relationship status." "I haven't the faintest idea," Vicky replied. "Of course. It was a silly question. And please call me Marty or Martin or even asshole. Anything but Mr. Miller," Martin joked. "What did your wife call you?" Vicky asked. "Marty," Martin answered. Well then, Martin, would you care to show me to the dance floor? Vicky invited. I'd be delighted, Martin replied. Martin asked the bartender to keep their drinks behind the bar and then led Vicky to the dance floor. They danced to an upbeat number, getting into the groove quickly. The fast song was followed by a slower one, and they stayed on the floor, pulling each other close for the slow dance. As they danced, Vicky rested her head on Martin's shoulder, and they looked into each other's eyes. They continued dancing through 2 slow songs in a row, never breaking their embrace. During a brief lull in the music, Vicky whispered in Martin's ear, "Martin, I am one horny woman. How about taking me back to your place and doing something about that?" Martin took her hand, settled the tab at the bar, and then they left the club. Vicky had arrived by Uber, so they climbed into Martin's car and he started the drive back to his condo. It was small, but he appreciated not having to maintain a lawn anymore. "Vicky, maybe I'm asking this a little late, but how much have you had to drink?" Martin inquired. "That was my first glass of wine on the bar when you walked up." "Why?" Vicky replied. "Because I don't take advantage of drunk women," Martin stated firmly. "No worries there, Martin," Vicky assured him. They arrived at his underground garage and took the elevator up to his floor. Vicky held onto Martin the entire time, stealing a few passionate kisses here and there. As soon as they entered his apartment and closed the door, Vicky wasted no time. She grabbed the bottom of her dress and pulled it off over her head. Martin had expected her not to wear a bra, but he was surprised to find she wasn't wearing panties either. He openly admired Vicky's nude body, from her long, brown hair to her large, full breasts, down to her lush dark brown bush and long, muscular legs. "My God, Vicky. You're stunning," Martin complimented. "Thank you, Martin. But are you just going to look, or are you going to touch?" Vicky teased. "Oh, definitely touch," Martin replied eagerly. "Then show me to your bedroom," Vicky demanded. Martin took her hand and led her down the hall. It was fortunate that Dallas was staying with her mother this weekend, though he would have made other arrangements if necessary. Vicky lay on her back on the bed, spreading her legs and running a couple of fingers up and down her wet slit. "Undress for me, Martin." "Slowly," she commanded. Martin complied, removing his shirt first, undoing each button one at a time. Then, he struggled a bit with his jeans due to his rock-solid erection. With Vicky now pleasuring herself, there was no way his arousal would diminish. Finally naked, Martin joined Vicky on the bed. "You have condoms, I hope?" Vicky inquired. Martin retrieved a small supply from his bedside drawer and placed them on the nightstand. "Strap one on, big boy." "I need a good fucking right now," Vicky demanded eagerly. Vicky adjusted her position to give Martin more room on the bed, and he wasted no time getting between her legs, sliding his full length inside her with the first thrust. He was hard, she was wet, and it worked perfectly. Their lips met as he thrust in and out of her rhythmically. Vicky urged him on. "Fuck me, Martin." "Oh yeah, fuck me," she moaned. Martin pounded into Vicky relentlessly. They both adjusted their positions for maximum pleasure, and Vicky's climax came just moments before his own. Vicky shifted onto her knees and pushed Martin onto his back. She removed the condom and immediately took his cock into her mouth, cleaning him of the cum that had coated him after she removed the rubber. He quickly became hard again, which was impressive for a man his age. Vicky straddled him, bareback. Martin considered saying something, but the sensation of Vicky's warm pussy felt too good, and he decided he could deal with any consequences later. However, Vicky only went a few strokes before pulling off. "Just wanted to feel the real thing for a minute," she said with a smile, before positioning her pussy over Martin's face and taking his cock into her mouth, initiating a 69 position. Martin had wanted a taste of her and had briefly felt disappointed when they went straight into intercourse, but he was content with how everything turned out. After more than an hour of continuous and enjoyable sex, they finally came to a rest. Martin lay on his back, with Vicky on her left side, cuddled against him. They were not quite asleep, but relaxed in that tranquil state between wakefulness and sleep. Martin sensed rather than saw Vicky raise her head. "Martin?" "MMM?" I just realized there was an erectile dysfunction aspect to your story. Am I remembering that correctly? I was wondering if you'd remember that. I thought so. Obviously, that's not an issue anymore. What happened? A couple of months after the accident with the oak tree, I started feeling a sensation like a tingling. It was similar to how I imagine it would feel when a paralyzed limb regains feeling. This sensation lasted for a few weeks, and then one day I woke up with morning wood. It didn't last long, but it was there. Were you still married at that point? Did you discuss it with your wife? We were legally married, yes, but our relationship was essentially over. We had been living separately for several weeks, and no, I didn't discuss it with her. It wasn't her concern. Over the next few months, I started experiencing morning erections more frequently and occasionally even during the day. After 8 or 9 months, things were pretty much back to normal. What did the doctors say? They didn't have a definitive answer. They conducted numerous tests and scans, compared to the ones from when it wasn't working, but they couldn't pinpoint a cause. Ultimately, they attributed it to a neurological anomaly. Do they believe that hitting the tree or your head fixed the issue? They're uncertain. It could have been the impact of the tree, or perhaps my brain finally healed itself. There's no way to be certain. Well, fortunate for me, then. I assume it's okay if I stay the night? How else are we going to have morning sex and enjoy breakfast together? They shifted to avoid the wet spot as best they could, and Martin pulled the blankets over them. As they settled into sleep, Martin had one more question. Vicky? Do you feel ready for another serious relationship? There was a long pause, and Martin feared he might have made a misstep and unsettled her. He half expected her to get out of bed and request to be taken home. Her attractiveness was undeniable to him, and not just her physical allure. He appreciated her intelligence and enjoyed her company. It wasn't love yet, but she was the first woman he had met since his divorce who had sparked that thought. Can we discuss that in the morning? Of course. Good night, Vicky. Good night, Martin. Vicky woke up earlier than Martin. Seeing him at peace, she decided not to disturb him. After taking a shower, she headed to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Martin's question before bed caught Vicky off guard. While she was attracted to him, she had been focused on enjoying the moment. She had convinced herself for months that she didn't need a man in her life, and to some extent, it was true. She had a fulfilling job and supportive friends, so she didn't need a man. However, deep down, she did want one. But would a decent man even want her after learning the truth? Martin was roused by the aroma of cooking. He stumbled into the kitchen to find Vicky wearing a shirt from the previous night and an apron she had found in his pantry. I was planning to take you out for breakfast. Too late now. You can take me out for lunch. Go take a quick shower, and breakfast will be ready. 10 minutes later, Martin joined Vicky in the kitchen just as she was setting the table. They enjoyed an omelet, sausage, and toast for breakfast. I didn't realize I had sausage in there. It was buried in the freezer. I hope it's still good. Martin reassured her that it tasted fine. Breakfast passed relatively quietly, and Martin took charge of cleaning the kitchen as Vicky had done the cooking. They engaged in casual conversation while cleaning, and when the last dish was put away, Martin turned to Vicky. Are you ready to talk? As ready as I'll ever be. Look, Vicky, I don't want to pressure you or intrude on your privacy. If you're only interested in a casual fling, that's okay. You don't owe me anything. I understand. It's just, there are things I need to tell you, and can we do this in the bedroom? I'll feel more comfortable there. They held hands and moved to the bedroom. Sitting on the bed facing each other, Vicky grasped Martin's hands firmly. Martin, I know we only met last night, at least in the real world. I think you're wonderful, and I'm definitely drawn to you. But there are some things I need to share with you. I mentioned that my husband left me for a 20-year-old, and that's true. But there's more to the story. The main reason he left me is because I can't have children. He wanted a family and sought someone who could give him that. He wasn't open to adoption. Not having biological children was seen as a failure, and I was the reason for it. As for how he's been since the divorce, I honestly have no idea. I'm a man in my 40s with a grown daughter. While I wouldn't have minded having kids, it's not a deal breaker for me. I'm glad to hear that. There's something else I want to be upfront about, something I'm not particularly proud of. After my divorce was finalized, I was feeling pretty low. I was getting older and had just lost my husband to a woman nearly half my age. I'm 37, in case you were wondering. I was curious, but I wouldn't have asked. They both shared a small laugh. I also felt incomplete, I guess is the best way to put it. The truth is, I didn't feel much like a woman at all. How can you feel like a woman if you can't have children, right? I know what you're thinking, but that's how I felt at the time. So, I set out to prove my womanhood. If I couldn't achieve it through motherhood, then I would do it by satisfying men. Many men, and mostly anonymously. I adopted the name Angela, and I never hesitated to go home with someone when I felt the need. It went on like this for months until I realized it was self-destructive behavior and sought help from a therapist. Even then, I continued, albeit less frequently, until I reached a point where I could stop. Isn't that what you were doing last night? Martin asked cautiously. He didn't want her to feel judged, but it was clear she had been actively seeking a partner the previous night. Yes, it was. I still have needs as a woman, and sometimes I go out to fulfill them. However, now I'm more selective about who I choose. There have been many nights where I went home alone and took care of things myself. I suppose I should be relieved I passed the test. You did, Martin, you did. I'm really enjoying our time together, and to answer your question, I would like to explore something more with you. But I wanted to be honest about my past. I've been tested, and fortunately, I never contracted anything. I don't require birth control, but I can provide a note from my doctor if you'd like proof. Assuming you're interested, I'd like both of us to get tested and agree to be exclusive. Martin sat silently for a few minutes, processing Vicky's honesty. She waited patiently, concerned she might have raised doubts about a potential relationship. Finally, he seemed ready to respond. Vicky, thank you for being upfront with me. I know it couldn't have been easy. I feel I owe you the same. Our experiences aren't entirely dissimilar. After my divorce, I was relieved to have ended it, but I struggled with feelings of inadequacy. I didn't see how I could ever find another woman and was facing the prospect of being alone. I had my own therapist who pointed out that as we age, many women lose interest in intercourse and prefer non-sexual affection. Even so, it still felt like I'd have to find a much older woman or wait several years. When I started experiencing erections again, even when things seemed back to normal, I still wasn't in a great place. Like you felt the need to prove your womanhood, I felt the need to prove my manhood. I went out a lot myself, seeking validation through sexual encounters, thinking it made me more of a stud. I wasn't any more discerning than you were. Some of the women I was with were, well, let's just say I had my fair share of encounters. This went on for a while, and I wasn't as fortunate as you were. It took a bout with gonorrhea to make me realize the consequences of my actions. I had to admit to my doctor that I didn't know the names of my sexual partners. We got it treated, and I started addressing my behavior in therapy. It's been a long time since I've been with a woman without protection, but I'll be happy to get tested, and I have no issue with being exclusive. In fact, that's a requirement for me. So, we're giving this a shot, right? You and me? Vicky asked, her eyes conveying that it wasn't a genuine question. You bet we are, Martin replied, knowing the question was more rhetorical. Martin's condom supply was depleted by lunchtime. The inevitable confrontation with Diana occurred about 3 months into Martin and Vicky's relationship. Their bond was strong, and Vicky and Dallas got along well. Though they still had their own residences, they spent every night together, hinting at a possible future together. At a club geared toward an older crowd, Martin and Vicky were enjoying their evening when Martin's demeanor shifted. His gaze moved past Vicky, signaling that something was amiss. Following his gaze, Vicky saw Diana approaching their table. Diana remained bitter since the divorce, believing she hadn't done anything wrong except perhaps not being discreet enough. Approaching the table, she made it clear she had no intention of being friendly. "Marty, how pleasant to see you," Diana's tone dripped with sarcasm. "Diana, Vicky, this is my ex-wife Diana." "Diana, this is Vicky," Martin introduced, though he would have preferred to avoid the situation. "It's nice to meet you, Diana." "I've heard a lot about you," Vicky said politely. "Is that so?" "Well, I haven't heard a word about you," Diana retorted bitterly. "We're divorced, Diana. It's been over a year. My personal life is none of your concern now. If you don't mind." Martin's unfinished sentence conveyed the clear message that he wanted his ex-wife to leave them alone. "Of course, Martin. I wouldn't want to intrude on your date. But Vicky, there's something you should know," Diana said with a hint of malice. "And what might that be?" Vicky asked, glancing briefly at Martin before focusing her attention back on Diana. "You might not want to waste your time with him. We got divorced because he can't perform anymore," Diana said smugly, looking to see Vicky's reaction. Martin observed Vicky closely, waiting for a response. Vicky suppressed a giggle and then turned to Martin with raised eyebrows as she spoke. "Is that true? You didn't mention that." Martin simply shrugged, letting Vicky take the lead. Diana believed she had succeeded in disrupting Martin's new relationship, just as he had done with her and Bill. But her satisfaction was short-lived. "Well, that's fortunate, because if what I was experiencing last night wasn't an erection, then I probably need medical attention." Vicky's remark wiped the smile off Diana's face. Martin and Vicky exchanged knowing looks, subtly mocking Diana's futile attempt to interfere. "Wait, what is she talking about, Marty? You're not saying it's actually working again, are you?" Diana demanded, her confusion evident. "As good as ever," Martin confirmed, a smirk playing on his lips. "But how is that possible? Did they find a solution?" Diana pressed, her tone desperate. Martin and Vicky remained silent, letting Diana stew in her own frustration. "Come on, Marty. You can blame my actions all you want, and I won't deny it, but I wouldn't have strayed if everything was normal," Diana pleaded. "Fine, Diana. The doctors ran tests but couldn't pinpoint the reason. It just started working again on its own. Perhaps if you had stood by me, as our vows promised, and shown some patience, we might still be married," Martin replied firmly, ending the conversation. Diana was speechless, her mind struggling to process the information. The revelation shocked her. Martin had contemplated attributing his recovery to the accident with the tree, but he knew Diana might twist it into some sort of perverse credit, claiming that her actions had indirectly led to his improvement and that he owed her something. It was best not to entertain that possibility. I can't believe it. It's like fate is mocking me," Diana finally managed to utter. "He just wants to level the playing field," Martin muttered under his breath. "What was that?" Diana snapped, narrowing her eyes. "Nothing. It doesn't matter. Now that you know, could you please give us some privacy for the rest of the evening?" Martin requested, his tone firm. Diana stood silently for about 30 seconds, then met Martin's gaze with an apologetic expression. "You're right, Marty. I apologize. I was wrong to act the way I did. I was selfish and short-sighted. I should have been stronger and more understanding. I ruined a good marriage, and I'm truly sorry," Diana admitted, her voice filled with remorse. With that, Diana turned and left not only their table but the club as well. Martin and Vicky watched her departure, feeling a twinge of sympathy for her. Then Martin turned back to Vicky with a smile. "Shall we dance, my love?" Epilogue. 6 months after the encounter with Diana at the club, Martin and Vicky tied the knot. About 9 months later, they welcomed their daughter, Ella. Now, you might be wondering, how did Vicky have a child when it was previously mentioned that she couldn't? Allow me to clarify. Martin and Vicky had been married for a few months when Vicky approached Martin one Sunday morning with a newspaper article. The article reported the tragic death of Wayne Jessup, Vicky's ex-husband, who had been killed by the police during a domestic disturbance involving his much younger girlfriend and their 3-month-old baby. Vicky explained that while Wayne had never been abusive during their marriage, she felt a sense of responsibility and wanted to help the young girl involved in the situation. Martin listened attentively, unsure of where Vicky was going with this. "You're aware that sometimes the newspaper contacts me for research or statistics for stories they're working on. So, I called in a small favor and asked them to reach out to her on my behalf. Not as a mental health professional, but as a person and Wayne's ex-wife. I offered to help her, and they passed along my contact information. I assume she reached out in some way?" "Yes, she did. I've been talking to her by phone and even met her a couple of times in person over the last few weeks." "And you're just telling me now?" "I'm sorry, love. I met her the first time discreetly because it seemed like the best choice at the time. After that, I felt like revealing it would betray her trust. So, I treated it like a professional case. I knew I'd eventually tell you, and here we are." "All right, what do you need to tell me? I assume this is the girl he left you for." "Actually, no. That girl's name was Amy, and she left Wayne because he pressured her to have a baby. Apparently, she wasn't ready for one, if at all. Carly, the one I've been talking to, is the second girl." "Okay, so you've been talking to her." Wayne started pressuring Carly too. She wasn't sure about having kids either, but she wanted to build a family with him, believing he loved her. So, she agreed. But after the baby was born, he became verbally and then physically abusive. She tolerated it at first, thinking it was just stress, but it escalated recently, so she called the police. She thought they'd calm him down and they'd talk the next day. Obviously, that's not what happened. When he found out she called the cops, he became agitated, cursed, and retrieved a gun from his dresser. She didn't even know he had one and hid in the baby's room, fearing for her life. The police arrived, and Wayne confronted them, telling them to leave and that everything was fine. They tried to reason with him, but he must have pulled the gun because Carly heard them yelling at him to drop it. Shortly after, she heard gunshots. Carly stayed hidden, unsure of what was happening. She emerged when the police began searching the house and calling for her. No one provided details, but she saw a body outside covered in a sheet and assumed it was Wayne. How traumatic that must have been. I'm sure she still had feelings for him, and experiencing that must have been terrifying. That's what she mentioned. According to the report, Wayne fired a shot and even hit a police car. They retaliated, and that was the end of it. Tragic. Just tragic, Martin said, unable to find more words. How's Carly coping now? She's managing. Getting counseling, although not from me since I'm too close. I referred her to someone. I think she'll be all right. They sat in silence for a while, contemplating the tragedy. Martin, there's something else. I'm not surprised somehow. The truth is, Carly isn't ready to be a mother. But she's afraid of giving the baby up to the system. Infants get adopted quickly, Vicky. She wouldn't stay there for long. We both know that, but, okay, I'll just say it. Carly wants us, well, you, to adopt the baby. I told her I'd discuss it with you. But Martin, I really want this baby. Martin was stunned. Parenthood again, especially with his age and Vicky's inability to conceive. And now another child, an infant, possibly entering their lives. Vicky broke the silence. I spoke with social workers and hospital attorneys. A planned adoption like this isn't common, but it's legal. You talked to others before me? I wanted all the facts before bringing this to you, Martin. And what does Carly want? No money, though I'd like to help her financially. She lost her sole support. She just wants to stay involved, with updates and maybe some involvement in Ella's life as Aunt Carly. Martin pondered for a while, understanding Vicky's approach, but wishing he could have supported her from the start. Could he handle another 18 years? Despite his doubts, he knew he couldn't deny Vicky something she wanted so deeply. Martin, please talk to me. Martin gazed into his wife's large, expressive, brown eyes. "What's the next step in the adoption process?" he inquired. And so, Ella became a part of their family. It wasn't immediate, of course. There were bureaucratic hoops to jump through, but eventually, the adoption was finalized, and they became a family of 3, or 4 if you count Dallas, who absolutely adored his new baby sister. Martin and Vicky assisted Carly in obtaining certification from a local technical college, and she secured a job at a dentist's office. She even began dating a young man she met there, and their relationship seemed promising. They kept in touch, meeting a few times a year, and Vicky regularly sent photos in the interim. Martin and Vicky remained content with their family as it was, with no plans for additional children. Vicky could drop Ella off at the hospital daycare during her shifts, visiting her several times throughout the day. Martin also managed to find time to visit his wife and daughter several times a week. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos.